If you know anything about ambitious district reform efforts, then you know the name of our next speaker, Michele Cahill. Michele is the Vice President of National Programs and Director of Urban Education at the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Since beginning her current stint at Carnegie in 2007, she's led some of its most vital work to create pathways leading to both educational and economic opportunity. Immediately before she returned to Carnegie, Michele was Joel Klein's Senior Counselor for Education Policy in New York City, where she was at the center of many of the district's reform efforts, including the City First high school reforms and other efforts focused on district redesign and accountability, school restructuring, new school development, and secondary education. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who knows more about what it takes to make big changes happen in our urban schools than Michele. The Carnegie Corporation is also a longtime underwriter of coverage in Education Week, including this year's Diplomas Count. So it's a distinct pleasure to welcome Michele Cahill today.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone here. High school reform is urgent. High school reform is daunting. And diplomas count even more than ever. And very pleased to see that the report this year is focusing on this notion of pathway, and that I think it raises one of the most important starting points for talking about high school reform, which is, what is the purpose of high school? And has it lost its purpose for so many of our young people who disengage, either actually completely in terms of dropping out from a system that is not engaging with them, or are disengaged in not meeting their potential, like kind of walking through. And I wanted to put this in a couple of contexts, but one of them is that the urgency of this has to do with the context that we're in of a rapidly changing economy and labor market, more rapidly changing labor market than economists even were predicting in 2002 when I was starting being responsible for high school reform in New York City, with a major decrease in routine jobs of all kinds. Routine manufacturing, everyone knows, but we're even seeing decreases in routine cognitive jobs. We're also obviously seeing non-routine, not lower cognitive jobs. I don't mean people are not, I mean they're not as demanding, but I mean when you see how many things we do for ourselves now through technology and everything. So the labor market that high schools were designed to prepare people for 100 years ago, when we were, as a country, getting to the first time when we had the majority of people go to high school, to 50 years ago, is completely changed and changing in ways we don't even understand yet, both because of the global economy and also because of technology. That means that the purpose of high school as a pathway to somewhere is even more urgent and also somewhat controversial. And I think we heard that earlier during the day. Where are we going? Where should we expect everyone to go? And how do we keep every student's option open, right? And how do we engage them? So I think the good news, there's a lot of bad news, a lot of challenging news vis-a-vis the economy. But the good news is we do know something more about this than we did 10 years ago, and we have a lot of good directions that we can go in. So I want to speak a little bit about that. When I was saying it's urgent, and I'll just say this rapidly, I know everybody's been talking about this, but it's urgent for our country, for our economy, our global competitiveness, but also for social cohesion. But it is incredibly urgent for each individual young person. That is, we are finding a declining social mobility in this country. And education is more and more the currency of mobility. And so we have to be committed to actually solving this really daunting problem. So with most daunting problems, we don't get to the solutions because they're wrenching and controversial, right? This isn't easy. And it's going to require a lot of people to do things differently than they have before, and for our systems to do things differently. So the first thing I want to talk about is let's start with the student. What's the task of adolescents? That's who is in our high schools, right? Adolescents, most psychologists would tell us, have two tasks that they have to accomplish. They have to form an identity and they have to build competencies, right? And they are compelled to do this. So it's up to us whether that's a positive, productive identity that is going to bring them into being good adult members of our society, or one in which they feel an identity of being socially isolated, disconnected, have no sense of the possibilities of the country. And it is integrated rather, with how they build their competencies. That is, these two things don't exist separate from one another, right? The more competencies and confidence that you can build, and the more that your competencies intersect with what the economy is going to reward you for, right? As well as what your peers and your family and others are supporting, and what the community is, the more that you have a sense of belonging to and investment in the future. So right now, that's challenging for lots of reasons of equity, in which we are not giving all of our young people the same opportunities to keep their options open that we're giving others. And that's why the college for all mantra has been so important. I agree with Amy that I don't think that most people who are talking about college for all meant a four-year college in which you went away and lived in a dorm room or whatever, but certainly the notion that we wanted to, as education reformers, break in to the old model of high school, which was a structurally stratified high school. And this has not gone away everywhere, right? We still have states that do not have a single graduation, high school graduation requirement in the sense, and we're changing this as a field with the Common Core. But it is really, really important, and I think I would argue that we can't move away from that as a preparation notion. That is, we have to get all of our students and commit ourselves to getting our students to the level that the Common Core standards are talking about in literacy and mathematics, or their futures are going to be stunted, because the kinds of jobs that are being created, and we don't even know all of them, are requiring critical thinking, decision-making, and also self-agency, using your skills and applying them to find out what your next job is going to be. And so those levels of skills and the formation of an identity in which you see yourself as a learner, so engaging learning and building skills are really, really, they're critical for all of K-12, but for adolescents, it's contested, right? They're not going to do it unless we engage them in doing it, right? And give them the opportunities. Okay, a couple of more things. I said I think we know something about how to get there. You all saw the terrible, dropout numbers, and that New York City, has lots of concentrated numbers of dropouts. The numbers are bad, and every one of them should be painful for all of us, as it is for the young person. But they're coming down. They are coming down. That number was about 10,000 more 8 years ago. Right? So I don't say that to say, oh, we did such a great job. What I say that is, it is possible. It is possible to do the things that Chris and others were talking about, understand the data, redesign schools, close the dropout factories, create new kinds of schools according to research-based design principles that both speak to adolescence and the high degrees of personalization that are needed, the notion of engaging students in a community where they have real roles, but also that are the design characteristics of any good school. So when we talk about the pathways, we shouldn't forget that this is part of the broader conversation about competent school leaders and excellent teachers and deploying them in ways that get to these schools. And then also change the district. Obviously, I would be talking about that since that's what I've worked on so much. But what I mean by that is that we have to be willing to understand what we need to end, what we need to say, this just doesn't work at all, what we need to bolster, and what we need to invent. Right? And I think we know quite a bit about that. We know that we need to end the dropout factories, the design of them, the others, and we've been doing that across the country. Some places more aggressively than others. Bolstering, we know it's some good characteristics. We know that every school should be using the tracking mechanisms to see, not tracking for academics, paying attention to every student and seeing where they are with credit accumulation, et cetera. These kinds of systems are just good management, right? I mean, everybody should be bolstering that. I count in the bolstering, though it's hard to do. We need to be paying attention to how we deploy teachers. You're not going to get too engaged in rigorous academic science if you're being taught by substitutes who don't know anything about science and who've never been trained in inquiry methods, et cetera. So there's some sort of basic things that we need to do. On the invention side, I would put a lot of the new school designs, some of which we used in New York City. Indiana is doing new tech as a statewide innovation. New visions for public schools, the UEI at the University of Chicago, the high-tech high models, the Asia Society global schools models. There's a lot of new ways of organizing high school. And then and those are showing a lot of good, promising results. I'd refer you to the MDRC study of the new schools in New York City, in which they got 8 percentage point graduation rate in a random assignment study, unscreened, academically unscreened schools, but in particular because this held up for all groups in the population, including males and including African American and Latino males. So we do have some things that are getting invented that have to be improved on, but which are breaking the mold of the old factory-style high schools. And that are, in addition, in particular the example I just gave, a reimagining of community schools. So I'm actually someone who's been involved in the 80s and was with the notion of community school. Sometimes people call them full-service schools. There are various models that many of us were involved in, beacons. What I think of as reimagining community schools and what we did in New York City was every new school, and we created about 240 of them, that was created, had to have a partner that was present at the design stage so that you were building in resources to build the social capital of the young people for the formation of identity that was also invested in all these young people graduating to high levels, and that provided both a kind of community validation but a community pathway. You want young people, as Ron Ferguson was saying, to be able to imagine a whole range of selves, right? Who they could be, and some of that will be interim and some of that will be long-term. But we need to do that, and we can do that not just with community-based organizations, but with others. Final thing, I guess 2 final things I want to say. One is defining success still in terms of student outcomes, right? We have to distinguish between what we need to experiment with in terms of design, distinguishing that from the policies of where we're trying to get to, right? So when we were defining multiple pathways to graduation, which I think became, we didn't invent the term, I just mean it became a common term lots of people were using, we were really clear that it was to the same diploma, right? That you would do different things to engage students to get there, and that some of them might pursue, therefore, if you were in a health careers academy, you might pursue a 2-year degree to become a physician, a physical therapy assistant or something. Others might pursue going to college and going to medical school, but everybody would have a Regents level diploma. You don't form another alternative, or else you're just going back to the old stratified system. So our responsibility is to figure out how to get kids engaged in that kind of academics, and increasingly to figure out how we're going to teach those higher levels of mathematics, for example. We may use all kinds of next generation digital work and tutors and everything. There's a whole range of things we need to do, but that's different from whether we're trying to get there. And my second final piece is that we need to see that we're contributing to engaging young people in becoming lifelong learners. And so that's, it's, in some ways I always think of that as like a term from my youth, because of the time period when I was graduating from college. We were thinking, and it sounds a little too, 60s, 70s to me, a little light. But I think now it actually means being in charge of your life, and that the capacities that we need young people to gain, particularly in high school, the capacities to have persistence in tackling difficult material, right? You're going to need that whether you're in what we think of as career technical or because, it's not components anymore. Even strict imagining things in what used to be vocational are systems, not components. They have to tackle difficult material, and they have to persist in doing it. We need to build them the supports and the opportunities during high school to do that. Thank you.